This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute, welcoming you to our podcast series of Fall 2012 events. On December the 5th, the newly appointed Chief of the Defence Staff of Canada, General Tom Lawson, gave his maiden public address to the Institute. His topic, Today's Canadian Forces and What the Future May Hold. General Lawson.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's Gil Taylor just said to me, your life just flashed before your ears. I'm just so delighted to be here tonight for so many reasons. This is hometown. I grew up about 5 miles west of here in the home that my mother is still occupying, 90-year-old mother. She uses it as her home base when she heads out skiing to Caledon Hills. I grew up with tears in my eyes most of the time, but sometimes cheering for my beloved Leafs and Argonauts. We're all walking a little taller after a couple of weeks ago, aren't we? Well, wasn't that fantastic? And ladies and gentlemen, I have to bring to your attention the fact that when I joined on the 1st of August 1975, I went to the officers' mess at CFB Downsview, and this impossibly fit, good-looking pilot named Brigadier General at the time, Richard Romer, was there to swear us all in. And we were all long-haired with our whatever suit we had finally pulled together for that event. And my father was there. My father was a former World War II Spitfire pilot. And after we were sworn in, I saw my father talking to the general. I said, "Oh, Dad, what are you doing?" He said, "You and I flew together during the war." And I thought, that's tremendous. Thank you very much, General Romer, for bringing me in that day. And also here tonight, we've got General Fraz Holman, who was my first math teacher at the Royal Military College, and later my first operational commanding officer of 421 Squadron over in Germany. And delighted to see you here, Fraz, and then so many friends from other areas. Honorary Captain Sonia Bada, who we had all kinds of great dealings at 8 Wing, and then she was on the Board of Governors at RMC, and you all know her for so many other things she's done. So, ladies and gentlemen, General Romer, Honorary Colonel Taylor, Mrs. Bada, Dr. Godfrey, all of the guests at the head table, Inspector Brown, General Lavoie, directors and members of the Institute, military and retired colleagues, men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs. I'm just delighted to be back home here, and it's a pleasure to be here with a group of individuals who share such a deep pride in our country's military heritage. I think it's fair to say that the title of tonight's event, Today's Canadian Armed Forces and What the Future May Hold, indicates your interest in national security, and this is so very heartening to a new Chief of the Defence Staff. As has been said, I've got about a month under my belt now, so the job's getting a lot easier. I pretty much got it down. Pretty sure the days will get a bit shorter, but you know, a good day is when you get a workout in during the day. A really good day is when you get a flight. I had both a workout today, and I landed my own aircraft, a King Air, down at this really short runway on the island here. But I found it to be a very short. Fighter pilots would find that to be a very short runway down at Billy Bishop Aerodrome, but. My staff who are here with me, the Canadian Forces Chief Warrant Officer Bob Claroux is with me, and we've got young Lieutenant Stephanie Hartzell, and beside her Major Chris Phillips, who's Public Affairs Officer. I'm putting them all up for bravery medals for being in the aircraft while I carried that landing out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not an historian by education, as General Lavoie said. My background's engineering, but my studies would suggest that Canadians have not a love-hate relationship with their armed forces, but perhaps a love-forget relationship. You know, love them when they're in harm's way, perhaps lose sight of them when they're out of harm's way and back home. However, the tremendous support that we in uniform have been feeling for an unprecedented decade and more, and I'm sure many of you have felt that, has really, I think, reflected the general rise of awareness amongst Canadians to the threats that to our nation's interests around the world, and the volatility, I think, that we see that maybe wasn't there back in the really good days of a polarized world. So before I begin, I'd just like to take a moment to thank you for the important work you do studying our history, educating Canadians, and keeping that awareness there. It's so very critical, especially in our big cities. You know, in so many ways, except for the reserves, which are so key to our health, we've pulled out of the large cities where so much of our support could come from. And as people like you joining organizations like this and focusing your efforts on being informed and informing others, that's so key to helping us to maintain that ties. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight, but also to serve as your vice patron. It's my privilege to take on that role. Delighted to have it. Thank you. So by way of introduction to your new vice patron, I'm a Toronto boy, as you're starting to get the sense right now. Grew up in a wonderful family, led, as I say, by a former Spitfire and Mustang pilot. And my father, who passed away 2 years ago at the age of 90, had what you might call a good war, if there is such a thing. He lost many friends. He was mightily shaken, I'm sure, by his experiences from time to time. But any post-traumatic stress disorder that he suffered was pretty much self-tended by telling the stories of his experiences to his young son, who soaked them all up whenever possible. And it led to me saving up my paper route money and started flying when I was 16. I had joined the Royal Military College when I was 17, and now I have a little over 37 years of service. And by the way, I had the opportunity during that time to fly airplanes, as you heard, in Europe, study the operational art of warfare down in Alabama, command the Royal Military College in Kingston, and help manage the Air Force headquarters in Ottawa. And as I've progressed through my career, my respect for the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, regulars and reserves, has continued to grow. You know, good recruiting, good training, good equipment, they all add up to a very capable armed forces. Just last week, for example, 3 of our search and rescue technicians, Sergeant Yannick Gilbert, Master Corporal Max Leheleme, and Master Corporal Marco Journeyman, were awarded the International Maritime Organization Award for Bravery at Sea. And this was from 40 member nations. You may remember their story. Last October, they parachuted into strong winds and high Arctic seas to save the lives of 2 Inuit hunters who were stranded near Igloolik, Nunavut. And Sergeant Gilbert ultimately gave his life in this effort, but the hunters were saved. So it's with the deepest sincerity that I say it's truly an honor and a privilege to be chosen to lead such exceptional men and women as their Chief of Defense Staff. Now, as I say, I've been in the job for a little over a month, and I've had an opportunity to talk to our military personnel, to the civilian side of our defense team led by Deputy Minister Rob Fonberg, to allies, to parliamentarians. Going to take off for the Middle East to head Southeast Asia to head into Kabul tomorrow, and then take a look at HMCS Regina and the Arabian Sea. I'm gaining a deeper understanding of where we stand right now and where we need to go. And there are challenges ahead, but I don't think there's a CDS who has come into this job who hasn't said there are great challenges ahead, and the ones I face largely are exciting. You know, we're coming out of a combat mission in Afghanistan. We've still got 950 in theater, but it's a combat mission the likes of which we haven't seen, haven't experienced since perhaps the Korean War, or maybe even before that. And now we have an opportunity to really take stock of where we are as an organization, where we need to improve, where we need to cut back, and where we need to stay the course. In the military, we're constantly learning and adjusting to the circumstances at hand, and I'd expect my priorities as CDS likely to change a little bit with that dynamic atmosphere. But in my mind right now, there are 4 key areas that we need to focus on, and I'd like to leave you with those thoughts. Leading the profession of arms, delivering excellence in operations, really our raison d'etre. caring for our people and their families, and finally, preparing our forces of tomorrow. Let me just begin first with leading the profession of arms. You know, serving in uniform, as so many of you know, is a unique calling, truly unparalleled in society, isn't it? There are many things that characterize the armed forces, but the thing that makes it unique is the unlimited liability attached to the service. This recognizes that soldiers, sailors, airmen, and airwomen may ultimately lose their lives in pursuit of mission goals. Now, we're going to do everything we can to mitigate the risks they're going to face, but we still may lose soldiers, and that makes all the difference. The Canadian military is well known for its emphasis on professionalism, on discipline, on proper conduct, and ultimately on self-sacrifice. Our doctrine guides us to uphold the core values of duty, loyalty, integrity, and courage. These aren't things one recognizes simply because one joins the forces. In my case, I'll admit, Fraz, sorry, when I showed up at RMC, my whole idea was to join for 1 year, which the glossy brochure said came without any sort of commitment. And of course, the recruiters know what the recruits don't, and that is, just come on in, take a look, get a taste of this life, and then try and leave it. After a year there, getting to know the life, getting to know the people, getting to know the challenges, there is a development that really ends up with an appreciation of the life, but also an awareness of some of these higher concepts like duty, loyalty, and courage. And it's through our military colleges, through basic training, through tactical training, staff colleges, professional development, leadership training, that we become who we are. And it's these things that assure the hallmark of success that the Canadian Armed Forces has become very well known for. Now, maintaining these professional standards is key to the second thing I want to talk about. That's delivering excellence in operations, our raison d'etre. As you know, the Canadian Armed Forces are the product of rich operational history that stretches back to the Boer War, through the First and Second World Wars, Korea. In the past decade, with our operations in Afghanistan, in Haiti, in Libya, and elsewhere, we've endured an extremely intense operational tempo. In fact, since 2001, almost 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces have deployed in support of our mission in Afghanistan alone, and 10,000 of them returned for at least a second time. One of them's right up here sitting beside me. There's Omer Lavoie. There might be others in the room. And that, through our service and our sacrifice in these operations, both past and present, we've built a strong reputation for operational excellence among our allies and our partners, and a solid foundation of trust with the Canadians we serve. I was recently at the Halifax International Security Forum. I think some of you were there as well. Participants spend the weekend trying to untangle the complexities of the current defense and security environment, but none of us can predict what the future security environment will look like. But one thing's certain, we will remain the ones that Canadians count on to protect and defend them here at home, to work with our great partners to the south in the defense of North America, and to project Canadian leadership and contribute to peace and stability abroad. Right now, as I say, we've got 1,600 Canadians working outside the country. Our biggest mission remains Afghanistan, where we're the second largest contributor to NATO's training mission. And this training mission is critical to consolidating the successes of the combat mission that went before it. There is hope where once there was very little hope. Elsewhere in the world, HMCS Regina is sailing the waters of the Arabian Sea, working to detect, deter, and protect against terrorist threats, and safely make sure 65 ships a day, the economy on salt water, make it through that very important waterway. And we have men and women deployed on a whole host of smaller missions with the multinational force and observers in the Sinai, for example, with the UN in South Sudan, and with NATO in Kosovo. In total, we have forces deployed on 15 different missions internationally, and that doesn't count the ongoing close coordination we have with our American allies in defense of the continent down at NORAD, where Fraz Holman was a 2-star some years ago. We have over 300 military personnel assigned to NORAD. We have CF-18 aircraft, 4 on immediate alert, ready to go at any time. We have refueling aircraft, long-range patrol aircraft available if and when required. And outside of our NORAD obligations, we currently have 4 ships from our Atlantic Fleet conducting joint international exercises with their American counterparts off the east coast of the continent. All the while, our first responsibility remains here at home, where we're ready to serve Canadians from Vancouver to Halifax in times of natural disaster. And in partnership with 3,000 on its way up to 5,000 Canadian Rangers, we maintain an ongoing presence in the north, perform a series of northern operations each year to exercise our sovereignty up there and to conduct surveillance. We also take search and rescue missions at sea and the air. Last year, alongside the Canadian Coast Guard, we managed almost 9,200 search and rescue incidents. So it's my job as Commander of the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that we're going to continue to deliver excellence in operations in the weeks, the months, and the years to come. And I can't do that without first looking after the health and welfare of our people in uniform and their families. They are our best credentials, our sons, our daughters, our neighbors, our friends. We ask a lot of our military members, regular and reserve, so many of you know that. We ask them to leave their home, we ask them to deploy across the country and around the world, we ask them to put themselves in danger for the sake of the mission. Their families feel the burden too. So we must provide the care and support they need every step of the way, not just when they're on a mission or preparing for a mission, but also when they return home, and finally, when they're ready to take the uniform off for the last time. Clearly, caring for the CF members and their families is a priority. And the Canadian Armed Forces has dedicated considerable energy to reducing the stigma associated with operational stress injuries and improving care for our mentally wounded men and women. Our government has invested additional funds for a total of $50 million in recent years, improving access to rehabilitation programs, to mental health services, and to career counseling, and our efforts have recently been recognized internationally. The Canadian Armed Forces were recently presented the Larry Award by NATO for providing the greatest medical support among all alliance members. This recognition, awarded only once before, specifically recognized the Role 3 Combat Hospital established and run by Canadians. This facility, amazingly, had a 98% rate of survival for members admitted for care, the highest ever in a war zone, and an accomplishment even more remarkable when you consider that the rate of survival in Sunnybrook Trauma Center, which is also extremely highly regarded for their capabilities, are at 90%. So, ladies and gentlemen, I intend to build on the progress that has already been made, and thankfully we're not alone in this effort. We're constantly overwhelmed by the support we see from Canadians across the country. Scholarship programs being set up for our military families, medical research being done on behalf of our military and veterans, rallies in red, care packages, even simple notes of thanks, all add up to a fabric that the nation has rarely shown, at least not for 10 years as we've been feeling recently. And I can tell you, these gestures of support are deeply appreciated. And they serve to encourage us all, as military members, to carry on, to tackle the mission that tomorrow has in store for us. Ladies and gentlemen, this leads me to my last priority, which I'll present to you today, preparing the forces of tomorrow. Perhaps one of the most difficult in the challenging budgetary times we find ourselves in. To do that, we must continue to gather lessons learned from recent operations and inject them into how we're going to do our business going forward. But we also need to give our forces the tools and equipment they need to do the jobs we ask of them. It's a simple statement, but not a simple challenge. The Canada First Defence Strategy is the government's commitment to rebuild, re-equip and modernize the Canadian Armed Forces to be an agile and combat-capable force. And you've seen many ways in which this has materialized in recent years: more recruiting, new equipment, improved infrastructure. These investments are key to the military's readiness and ultimately to our operational success. Now, the Canada First Defence Strategy remains our guiding framework going forward, but as we say, there are budgetary constraints that weren't there when it was published in 2008. Now, this is true, as you know, for every federal government. We all need to do our part to balance a budget which has become increasingly unglued. So we're thinking more about a system of systems approach, how a mix of complementary equipment and capabilities can get the job done more efficiently. Across the defense team, both military and civilian, we're also thinking about how we can improve our internal processes and procedures. And this is not an area we've done a lot of work in years past. We've had a lot of budget cuts, we've survived a lot of budget cuts, but we've never approached it from the point of business process renewal. If we can reduce administrative burdens, we will have more resources to invest. Standing in front of this audience, many of you knowing more about military history than I do, you probably don't need to be told that the CDS position, which was stood up about 50 years ago, was originally created with the idea of streamlining the decision-making and to make the armed forces more cost-effective. So I'm not the first CDS to face this kind of challenge of trimming budgets, and nor will I be the last. But we are an organization that's accustomed to this. While we are an organization that's accustomed to this, we have a lot of work ahead of us. That's why we have established a defense renewal team to help us identify ways to maximize every tax dollar that's invested in defense. And progress is already being made. You probably saw the announcement earlier this fall about the stand-up of the Canadian Joint Operations Command. The goal is that by amalgamating the operational commands into one, we'll reduce administrative overhead by 25%, and that 25% will be reinvested back for requirements for our troops. Going forward, it will be my responsibility to ensure that we continue with this focused, concerted effort to transform the way we work. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, it's heartening for me as we tackle these challenges that the Canadian Armed Forces have external partners like the Royal Canadian Military Institute. As I've outlined for you, the forces have a critical job to do serving this country, and it's a busy one. I know that the defense team we have today, military and civilian, is up to the challenge, but partnerships are also essential. Partnerships with allied militaries, other government departments, and private industry, but also with organizations like yours who are working so hard to ensure that the military story is preserved and disseminated, and that our issues past and present remain in the public eye. It's critical, ladies and gentlemen. So I thank you for your continued work in fostering an interest in Canadian defense. And as we spend the evening together, I look forward to hearing more of the stories you have to share and the useful lessons that you've gleaned from the past. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for the privilege of serving as your vice patron, and I hope we have the opportunity to return when your new building is ready. That'll be very exciting. Thank you for reminding me and all Canadians of the importance. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Are there any questions from the audience? Are there any questions from the audience? I know Gordy Elms has got a question there. Are there any questions from the audience? I have one question, and how, sir, can we help you ensure that Canada gets the best fighter? I know there's some concern about the F-35 and its stealth capabilities, but it is the best in the world. How can we help you?
Well, thank you for that, Ed. As you're well aware, ladies and gentlemen, the government had pretty much committed back in 2010 to the way ahead for the new generation fighter. It's an expensive project. There are a lot of taxpayers' dollars going into that. I'm very comfortable the way it's going right now. As you know, Ed, the Public Works Department has a secretariat that have set up what you've probably heard as a 7-point plan. Our input as the Canadian Armed Forces to that plan is truly to provide them with a statement of requirements, which is always military business, and then to help them assess and rate the options that they come forward with. But I think more than anything else, what we've done is we've bought for the Canadian taxpayer a period of time when everybody can become more comfortable with the options that are out there and the way ahead. So while I won't comment directly on your assessment of a preferred way ahead, Ed, yeah. I think what we can be comfortable with is the fact that Canadians will largely have the opportunity to come to a more agreed upon way ahead, which perhaps they were not in the position to agree to in 2010.
Excellent. There must be some other questions from the audience. I know you were all spellbound.
And I have a quick question. Yeah. Could you give us any insight into how the new era of frugality will be affecting the reserve force?
Yeah, that's it. Actually, I'll take the one. Yeah. So you will be aware that even even as recently as my very changed command, the Prime Minister pointed down to me after saying goodbye to Walter and laid out a pretty clear path ahead on what he expects in terms of effectiveness and efficiencies to be found. But you'll also, if you parse what he had to say and his June letter to the Minister and to Walt Matinchuk that was very conveniently released to the press, that in that letter he says you will do it while holding on to all of your capabilities and not decreasing the number of men and women in uniform. Now that's a very difficult task because the cuts we've gone through, and many of you know them better than I, but in the 35 years I've seen, probably half of them were very tough years, and there might have been even tougher years before I got in, and many of you would know about that. But in a lot of those cuts, the way we managed the goals was by cutting people in uniform and by cutting capabilities. So the message is quite a heartening one, and now to answer your point, Gil, we've been told that we will maintain 68,000 in uniform, 27,000 reserves, and 25 to 26,000 civilians. 27,000 reserves unreduced. Now what you will have heard is that some of the savings that we're going to find will be from a rebalancing of Class B reserves. Everybody okay with Class B? You understand what that is? I would think this audience would mostly know that. Full-time reservists. We were up to 11,000 full-time reservists at the peak of the conflict in Afghanistan, up from about 4,000 prior to the combat in Afghanistan, and we will be returning to about 4,500 Class B positions, while maintaining 27,000 in one class or another. Rangers, Class A, but it will be part-time. So I think largely what we're doing is returning to a more traditional form of the reserve that really does serve in many ways to link us to our roots, our militia roots across Canada. This is perhaps not great news for those who got out of the forces, quickly got back in as Class B and brought all those skills that were so necessary for us as we were fighting the war. But I think it will largely be great news for those who have traditionally been part of our reserve communities all across Canada. So I think it is a very heartening message.
You've been listening to General Tom Lawson, Chief of the Defence Staff, addressing the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing many of you in person at future events. Our next speaker, on January 24th, 2013, will be Lieutenant General Peter Devlin, Chief of the Land Staff. Once again, thanks for listening, and best wishes to everyone for the festive season.